What's up, guys? We got something a little different in this video. Not different concept-wise, it is just another versus battle, go over the stats and such. But different in that these are two characters I haven't talked about before, them being Sauron and Darth Vader from Lord of the Rings and Star Wars respectively. So the reason, and I guess rationale behind this versus matchup is, I don't know, I've been in a bit of a Lord of the Rings kick recently, especially with Season 2 of The Rings of Power coming out. I just have been really enjoying it. I've been getting a little more into the Lord of the Rings lore as well, and I thought, why not make a video featuring Sauron? And I was thinking about different villains that I could put him up against. The only other one that came up to mind was Voldemort, but personally not a huge Harry Potter fan, and I didn't feel like spending the time researching it just because I don't really enjoy it. So I decided to pick the Sith Lord Darth Vader. I think thematically it's still pretty cool. Two of the most iconic villains, albeit Sauron's more so iconic for his name as opposed to the form of him that we're going to be using in this video, but we'll get into that in just a second. So first, I just want to make sure we're clear. For Sauron, I'm going to be using Sauron from the Second Age, and I'm going to give him access to the One Ring because that contains most of his power. And so, just to give, I guess, like a rough idea for those who are maybe a little unfamiliar with Lord of the Rings chronology, the events of the Lord of the Rings movies that we've seen, Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, and Return of the King. Those take place in the Third Age. So the Second Age is the events right before that. It's the time period that the current TV show takes place in. And the Second Age is around the time it is the time that Sauron forged his ring and then, went to war. And then it's also, I guess, the end of the Second Age is what we see in the prologue of the first Lord of the Rings movie with Isengard cutting the ring from Sauron's hand. So we're basically just going to be using the version of Sauron from right there. It's worth noting that there are much stronger versions of Sauron depending on where you take him in the chronology. Before he enters Ea, he is kind of more like a corporeal being, and his scaling can be a little higher. And generally, I think that there is a lot of difficulty in scaling Lord of the Rings characters. A lot of it comes from statement as opposed to feats directly. And at the same time, there's like a lot of, it's not like a well-established set of scaling. So everything I do here is based on what I could find and what I could verify. I think some people may scale Sauron higher, but this is where I feel comfortable scaling him, at least in the Second Age. Okay, so first off, just for like some general, I guess, feats of his like AP and power level, right? We know that Sauron is capable of at least terraforming Barad-dûr, which is the tower that he inhabits in Mordor. And so just to get an idea as to the size of Barad-dûr, we have this visual. And for those of you who may not be familiar with, I guess, any of these buildings, there's really no good way to quantify it aside from that. I guess I could give it to you in like school buses tall. But, Pyramid of Giza, pretty big. Eiffel Tower, pretty big. The Burj Khalifa, obviously the biggest building that we have in the world. And Barad-dûr is not only taller, but also just like clearly much more massive. I would say that being able to terraform an object of this shape should put Sauron comfortably at like small mountain level. Not only that, but we can also scale him to some of the other Maya, one of which is Osei, who was the Maya of the sea, who was able to raise the island of Numenor from the ocean, and created the island of Numenor essentially. And so to give an idea, Numenor, through calculations that other people have done, is estimated to be around 170,000 square miles in size. This is very close, I guess, for like a real world reference to the size of Iran. And so I guess for those Americans, my fellow Americans out there who may not really have a size, like, I guess, reference for that because you're bad at geography, I've found this image. Oh, I'm sorry. I mean Iraq, not Iran. But I've overlaid Iraq on top of the United States just to give a reference for like how big it is. If you live in the Midwest United States and you don't have a frame of reference based on this, then honestly, I'm not catering to your kind anyway. Just how it is. So the lengths of the ranges that we have, again, for Mordor is very similar to this. A little smaller, but generally what we can say is that we might be putting like this level of terraforming at like a small country levels of power. But to be fair, I think that it's a little vague, and we may not necessarily be able to say exactly how much of the area around Barad-dûr Sauron was actually able to terraform, like whether it was actually all of Mordor. I think the statements on this are a little vague, but there is also this general idea that the area and land around Mordor is like constantly heavy with like, you know, the darkness and like the presence of Sauron. So if you were to take that literally as like some sort of like, you know, Sauron has control of the weather around the area of Mordor, or something to that effect, then I think you could more comfortably get him to that small country level. But I think most consistently we can probably be putting Sauron at like small mountain to maybe mountain range levels in terms of like pure AP, and that would just be purely through his terraforming feats, as I think those are probably the strongest indicators that we have for him. Okay, now I'm going to go through a list of some of his powers and abilities. This is going to be a little much. There's obviously a lot that I'm not going to be including, but really we're going to be doing the main gist of like the most important ones that I think have applications. Shape-shifting, Sauron's able to shape-shift. We've seen it a lot. He doesn't do it like in a combative sense. He does it more so usually like as a part of like his trickery, but he does also sometimes use it combatively. He's immensely physically powerful. We know he's able and capable of fighting even like in fisticuffs against some of the strongest warriors in Numenor. And so he should also reasonably upscale from the Balrog, who itself was able to destroy all of the Dwarven Kingdom. So we can probably put his strength at, you know, like some absurdly high level such that he would be capable of like single-handedly fighting a whole army of men, right? But at the same time, you know, his main claim to fame is not his physical strength. And, you know, I don't think that his physical strength nearly scales to his same like AP that he can get with his sorcery, right? Speaking of sorcery, he is a master of sorcery and necromancy. Sorcery in Lord of the Rings is pretty vague, right? And so is Sauron's power set, but necromancy is something he's more demonstrably able to do. He's very capable of like enslaving people's wills and controlling people, and he also has like to some level control over spirits after death. Also has some sort of like some like pyrokinetic and like I don't know what you would call shadow kinesis. I don't know if there's a technical term. Levels of magic as well. He's also, in some sense, immortal. Even when he had his ring cut from him and he lost his physical form, he still existed as an entity. I will say, for the scope of this battle, I will say that if Darth Vader is able to, I guess, remove Sauron's body and like take his body out of the equation, so Sauron's just like a floating entity that doesn't really have, you know, that much influence over the world, aside from, you know, the way he did in Lord of the Rings, I'm going to count that as a win, right? So just so we're clear on that. Otherwise, I think it'll be hard to say, like, you know, could Darth Vader's force abilities overpower Sauron's spiritual form? It's hard to say for sure. Okay. And so the most, I guess, pertinent and maybe most important thing, we'll get into this a little bit later, thing Sauron has in his kit is that he is a master of manipulation. Throughout the Lord of the Rings, I guess, lore, we have constant showings of him corrupting otherwise, like, you know, noble or good people. Even like the ring itself, which is infused with a lot of Sauron's power, is very like capable of corrupting the wielders if they're not, well, you know, Frodo. Frodo, right? Some of the times we've seen it, you know, we've seen Sauron be able to corrupt Saruman, who is another Maya and a very powerful wizard. We've seen him be able to corrupt the king of Numenor. He was able to enslave the Nazguls using the rings, etc., etc. He's really just like a complete, how do you say, like master at the manipulation. He's good at gaslighting is how it is, right? So now to get on to Darth Vader and some of his relevant feats, right? And just for, I guess, the sake of being consistent, we will also give Darth Vader some of his feats outside of the canon, just to make sure he's not getting nerfed too hard, because I think canon Darth Vader is maybe a little hard to scale to the level that we can scale Legends Darth Vader, right? So to give an idea, and again, in terms of like AP, I'm mostly going to be using Force feats because that's really as impressive as Darth Vader can get, right? So Darth Vader should reasonably upscale from before corruption Anakin Skywalker. At least in terms of his Force abilities, they become a lot more refined. Physically, it might be a bit more of a toss-up in terms of like how fast he can move and such, or even how strong his strikes are. But this version of Anakin Skywalker is often considered to be one of the, if not the strongest Force users in all of Star Wars Legends, and thus he should upscale reasonably from characters like Starkiller and Darth Nihilus. Starkiller, a character who is very capable of moving, say, like a Star Destroyer. We've seen that feat very consistently. And Darth Nihilus, who is a character capable of literally consuming entire planets using his Force power and Force drain. And so, I think that at the very least, you can say that it would be like a continental level feat, because maybe he's not actually like literally ripping a planet apart, but he is capable of affecting all of the life on a planet at once and taking all of its, I guess, energy. He does almost like literally eat planets in that sense. So I do like generally put this at like a planetary feat, but you can probably put it a little lower if that's what you say. But either way, I think we can probably say that in terms of like pure AP and the ability to, I guess, affect the world in that sense, Darth Vader does take a slight edge over Sauron. And in terms of like actual appliances of his Force abilities, which again, like most of his feats scale off of his Force anyway, so being proficient in the Force in Star Wars usually means that you're going to be a top tier combatant in multiple ways. So Darth Vader's main claim to fame is his Force choke. He is capable of using it really more precisely than we've seen any other character in Star Wars capable of doing, where he's even capable of literally like squeezing people's internal organs and like, just killing them that way. Normally he uses it on people's necks, or I don't know what exactly, if it's the neck or if he's like choking the esophagus, whatever. He's able to use it to choke people, hence the name Force choke. And also, obviously, he's able to use the Force to generally enhance his perception abilities, his movement, etc., etc. He's also been shown being able to use, I believe it's called Force Kinetics, but it's similar to Force Lightning, except it's like more of a ball form. Although he doesn't use this often because obviously electricity is not something that pairs very well with his cybernetic parts. And we've also seen, just to clarify, like feats of Darth Vader pushing and pulling the likes of spaceships as well. Not quite the size of a Star Destroyer, although I think we can assume that he will. But, we saw him able to completely arrest a ship from taking off and prevent it from moving. Okay. Now, there is one important power that I think does it becomes pretty important when it comes to analyzing Darth Vader's fights, especially with characters who are like relative to him, and that's the technique called Shatterpoint. So Shatterpoint is a technique that really only Mace Windu ever shows being able to use in the Star Wars verse, and it's essentially an ability that grants the user insight as to the weaknesses of either a person or just like any physical thing, right? So Mace Windu is able to essentially he can look at a person using Shatterpoint, identify what their weaknesses are, and then obviously exploit that to try to win a fight. Darth Vader is obviously going to be a much more proficient Force user than Mace Windu, though I don't know if that directly means that Darth Vader should be able to use the Shatterpoint ability. Again, we don't have anybody aside from Mace Windu being confirmed using the Shatterpoint ability, so I think that it's a bit of an outlier to say that characters who upscale for Mace Windu in terms of Force ability should be able to use it. Therefore, for this fight, I'm not going to assume that Darth Vader has a Shatterpoint ability, just for what it's worth. I don't know if this is a controversial take. I'm not super familiar with how people generally scale Darth Vader, but I will say I don't think the Shatterpoint ability is something he should have available to him. That being said, I think that's kind of already enough to reach a conclusion as to who I think is going to win. And now there is a little bit of nuance to this, and I also want to make sure I clarify. I did not go over speed scaling as I normally would when it goes over characters, because really with these characters, there's almost nothing for speed scaling. I think that for this fight, I'm going to assume that they're at least relative to each other, maybe giving Darth Vader a slight combat edge, but generally, they're both just capable of fighting people that are like vaguely more impressive than normal humans. Again, with Force abilities and like necromancy powers and stuff, they can upscale obviously, but in terms of like pure physicality, I wouldn't even say that they're that much above peak human. Controversial take, I know, but that's, I guess, kind of my logic, if that makes sense. So take that as you will, and then in terms of power, obviously Darth Vader is like, I guess in terms of like actual effect, much stronger. I don't think raising mountains is going to be anything close to the amount of AP that Darth Vader would be able to put out if he was using his Force abilities to its fullest. That being said, if I were to imagine a fight between these two, I would have to give the fight to Sauron, And the reason for that is in a fight outside of, I guess, bloodlust. So if these characters are in character, then I think Sauron wins primarily through his, I guess, like mastery of manipulation. We've seen him obviously able to tempt characters who are like very strong-willed. Obviously, like in Lord of the Rings, very few characters are capable of holding or like touching the One Ring without it like over, I guess, corrupting them. And the ring is just like a small fraction, not a small fraction, a sizable chunk of Sauron's power. So the idea that, even a character like Aragorn or Boromir would be corrupted by the ring is a strong indicator that Sauron is generally very good at corrupting people and like very high in his like manipulation capabilities. And of course, Darth Vader is a character who is maybe the most infamously easy to manipulate. Maybe easy to manipulate is a little mean, but he was manipulated by Darth Sidious into becoming Darth Vader. And, as Darth Vader, he also was not like super, I guess, strong in his convictions, as he was eventually able to turn back when he was fighting Luke at the end of episode 6. And so Sauron, I think, also has the ability to really play into it, where Sauron can literally just say like, hey, I can give you the power to resurrect the people that you love. And Darth Vader would look at that and be like, okay, wow, that's exactly what I need and want in life. So, yeah, let's do that. And then, Sauron can do his normal Sauron trickery and use that in some sense to, well, enslave, beat, or otherwise, make Darth Vader unable to hurt him. And so I think some people may not like this, I guess, result as a battle, because this isn't even like a really analysis of who would win in a fight. I will say, if I were to consider the characters bloodlusted, that is to say, they are trying their very hardest to kill each other, and I still have like that same condition where they just have to like, I guess, knock out the other's physical form. They don't necessarily have to erase them from existence, right? Because otherwise, Darth Vader has his ghost spirit or whatever, force spirit afterwards, and Sauron has his corporeal form. So in that situation where they're bloodlust and they're trying their hardest to win, I actually would give it to Darth Vader. And the reason for that is pretty simple. I think that any object that emits some sort of like, strong power would generally be perceptible by the Force, at least like in some sort of like verse equalization context. So I think Darth Vader would very easily be able to understand in sense that, a majority of Sauron lies within the ring. And then from there, it's just really an easy matter of Darth Vader has like a few different ways he can do it. He could literally just use the Force to pull the ring off of Sauron's hand. If Sauron is, I guess, trying to hold on to it, Darth Vader can use the Force to just rip off Sauron's arm. Like, there is a lot of ways that Darth Vader can just separate the ring from Sauron and then win the fight in that way. But, it's not necessarily like a pure physical head-to-head when it comes to these fights. If we're analyzing it in character, I do give the win to Sauron at least like 8 times out of 10. But in a world where Darth Vader is bloodlusted, just trying to win, or otherwise able to resist the manipulation from Sauron, I would actually probably give it to Darth Vader, just because the One Ring in this case is like a pretty big weakness, especially against a Force user who can kind of just rip it from you. So that being said, that's all I've got for this video. And, if you like it, please subscribe, follow, do whatever you'd like. And we also have a Discord in the, I have a Discord in the comment of this video. So, I guess look over that. If you'd like to join, come. You can make fun of me, tell me how wrong I am about this, or tell me how much you appreciate the scaling that I provided. Aside from that, thank you guys for listening. Appreciate you all, and have a good day.